Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I drive trucks for a living. Been doing it for about 15 years now, and nothing really prepares you for what I'm about to share. It was a Tuesday night in October 2018, and I was hauling a full load of consumer electronics from a warehouse in Phoenix heading east toward Albuquerque. The manifest showed mostly tablets, smartphones, gaming consoles, the kind of stuff that gets stolen and flipped quick on the black market. I just passed through Flagstaff around 11 p.m., and the temperature gauge showed 38 degrees outside. My wife, Melissa, had called me earlier that evening to remind me about our daughter's soccer game that weekend, and I remember thinking how I couldn't wait to get home after this run. The CB radio was quiet, just occasional static, and I had an old country playlist going to keep me awake. That stretch of I-40 through Arizona gets pretty desolate after midnight. Nothing but darkness and the occasional coyote crossing. About an hour past Flagstaff, maybe around midnight, I noticed these two cars up ahead acting strange. One was a dark blue sedan, looked like a Nissan Altima with those aftermarket LED strips under the chassis that made it glow purple. The other was a silver SUV, probably a Chevy Tahoe, with heavily tinted windows and no front license plate. They were weaving between lanes, speeding up then slowing down, almost like they were racing or messing around. At first I figured it was just some kids being stupid, maybe drunk, so I eased off the accelerator and gave them plenty of space. The last thing you want when you're hauling 60,000 pounds of cargo is to get tangled up with reckless drivers. But then they started doing this weird synchronized thing where they'd match speeds perfectly, driving side by side across both lanes for about 30 seconds before one would surge ahead. My dashboard showed we were doing about 55 in a 75 zone, and something about their movements felt deliberate, practiced even. The whole situation changed in about 10 seconds. The Tahoe suddenly gunned it and pulled ahead maybe 200 yards while the Altima stayed right in front of me, maintaining that slow crawl. Then I saw the Tahoe's brake lights flare up like Christmas decorations as it jerked hard to the left, sliding sideways across both lanes. The tires screamed against the asphalt, leaving these thick black marks I could see in my headlights. My first thought was that the driver had lost control, maybe blown a tire or something, because the SUV ended up completely perpendicular to the road, blocking everything. I hit my air brakes hard, and the whole rig shuddered as 70,000 pounds of truck and cargo fought against momentum. The sound was like a giant metal beast groaning, and I could smell the brake pads burning immediately. Thank God I'd left enough distance, because I managed to stop about 40 feet from the Tahoe. The Altima had slowed even more, and was now creeping along in the right lane beside me, boxing me in against the median. My instincts kicked in before my brain fully processed what was happening. 23 years of marriage to a cop's daughter means you hear stories, and Melissa's dad, Frank, had told me about these highway cargo theft rings operating out of Mexico and California. I reached for my CB radio with one hand while my other went to the gear shift, ready to ram through if needed. But before I could even key the mic, both cars' doors flew open simultaneously, and 4 men jumped out wearing black ski masks and dark coveralls. 2 came from the Tahoe with crowbars, heading straight for my trailer's lock mechanism. The other 2 from the Altima ran toward my cab, and one was carrying what looked like a small sledgehammer. The guy with the hammer had this weird limp, like his left leg was shorter than his right, but he moved fast despite it. They weren't saying anything, just moving with this eerie efficiency like they'd done this 100 times before. I locked my doors just as the first guy reached my driver's side door. He started pounding on the window with his fist, not the hammer yet, just testing. Through the glass, I could see his eyes through the mask holes, bloodshot and wide, maybe high on something. The window was rattling in its frame with each hit, and I knew it wouldn't hold long against that hammer. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but there was no signal out there, just that mocking no service message. The CB radio was my only shot, So I started broadcasting on Channel 19, the emergency channel all truckers monitor. Breaker, breaker. This is eastbound I-40 mile marker 178. Attempted hijacking in progress. Need immediate assistance. 4 armed suspects. Static came back, then nothing. The guys at my trailer were making progress. I could hear the metallic grinding of crowbars working against the lock through my side mirrors. One of them had produced a portable angle grinder from somewhere, and orange sparks were flying off my trailer doors like a 4th of July sparkler show. The limping guy finally brought the sledgehammer up and swung it at my window. The safety glass spider-webbed instantly but held together, these white cracks spreading out like lightning bolts from the impact point. He reared back for another swing, and that's when I made my decision. I dropped the truck into gear and hit the accelerator, turning the wheel hard right toward the shoulder. The rig lurched forward with a diesel roar that drowned out everything else. The 2 guys at my cab dove away. The limping one actually rolled pretty athletically for someone with that gait issue. My plan was to get around the Tahoe using the shoulder, even if it meant taking out some guardrail. But as soon as I started moving, I heard gunshots. 3 quick pops that sounded like firecrackers but definitely weren't. My passenger mirror exploded into pieces, and I could hear another round punch through the sleeper cabin behind me. These weren't just thieves. They were willing to kill for this load. I floored it, and the big Peterbilt 579 responded like an angry bull. The speedometer climbed past 40, 50, approaching 60 as I aimed for the narrow gap between the Tahoe and the concrete median barrier. At the last second, the masked men scattered like roaches when you turn on a kitchen light. The one who'd been shooting, a tall, skinny guy from the Tahoe, actually dropped his pistol and had to scramble back for it. My truck's front bumper clipped the Tahoe's rear end with this horrible shrieking of metal on metal, spinning it about 90 degrees and shoving it into the median. The impact jolted me hard against my seatbelt, and my coffee thermos went flying, spilling lukewarm coffee all over the dash. But I was through, back on open highway, and I kept my foot planted on that accelerator. In my remaining mirror, I could see them running back to their vehicles, the limping guy moving with surprising speed despite his handicap. The Altima's engine roared to life first, its purple underglow creating this surreal streak of color against the dark asphalt as it gave chase. For about 3 miles, it was just me and that Altima in the strangest race of my life. They stayed about 50 yards behind me, matching my speed at around 75, which was pushing it hard for a loaded rig on that stretch. Every time the road curved, I could feel the trailer wanting to swing wide, the cargo shifting inside with these deep metallic groans. Then I saw it, a sight that nearly made me weep with relief. Red and blue lights appeared in my mirror, coming up fast from behind the Altima. Not just 1 patrol car, but 3, plus what looked like an unmarked detective vehicle. The Altima immediately hit its brakes and tried to take an emergency vehicle turnaround, but the cops were ready for that move. 2 units followed while the others continued toward me. Later, I found out that another trucker about 10 miles behind me had heard my CB call and had enough signal to phone it in. Doug Brennan was his name, hauling produce from California, and I still send him a Christmas card every year for saving my life that night. The cops had me pull over at the next mile marker, and I sat there shaking while they checked on me. The officer who approached my cab was a young woman, couldn't have been more than 25, with this thick Boston accent that seemed completely out of place in Arizona. Officer Kathleen Murphy, badge number 4417. Funny how you remember certain details when you're in shock. She had me step out of the cab slowly, and that's when I saw the damage. Beyond the missing mirror and the bullet holes, there were pry marks all along my trailer where they'd been working on the lock. The angle grinder had cut about halfway through the thick steel before I'd driven off. Officer Murphy said they'd been tracking this crew for 6 months, hitting truckers carrying electronics between Phoenix and Albuquerque. They specifically targeted solo drivers on Tuesday and Wednesday nights when traffic was lightest. The limping guy, she told me, was actually the ringleader, a former dock worker who'd injured his leg in a forklift accident and knew exactly which shipments were worth hitting. They caught 3 of the 4 that night. The Altima passengers gave up pretty quick once the spike strips shredded their tires. But the limping guy somehow vanished into the desert. The cops found the Tahoe abandoned about 2 miles from where everything went down. Still had my truck's paint on its bumper and everything. The 3 they arrested were all from the same crew out of Bakersfield, with records for armed robbery and interstate cargo theft. During the investigation, they found a whole notebook in the Altima with detailed information about trucking routes, shipping schedules, even driver names and habits. My run was marked with a red star, and the note, electronics shipment, single driver, no team, vulnerable at mile 175-180. Turned out they had someone at the Phoenix warehouse feeding them information, a night shift supervisor named Glenn Howard, who'd been selling shipment details for $500 a pop. The FBI got involved because of the interstate nature of it all, and I had to testify at the trial 8 months later. The company gave me 2 weeks paid leave after that night, but honestly, getting back in the truck was harder than I expected. For the first month back, every time I saw 2 cars driving together at night, my chest would tighten up and I'd start sweating through my shirt. Melissa wanted me to quit, find something local, maybe work dispatch or become a driving instructor. But trucking is what I know, and I wasn't going to let those bastards take that from me. I did make some changes though. Started carrying a legal tire thumper that doubles as a pretty solid defensive tool, installed better locks on my trailer, and now I always check in with dispatch every hour when doing night runs. The company also started sending high-value electronics shipments with team drivers only, and they vary the routes randomly. That warehouse supervisor, Glenn Howard, got 7 years federal time for his part in it. The 3 they caught that night got 15 to 20 for armed robbery and conspiracy. The limping guy, though, he's still out there somewhere, and that keeps me sharp every single run. It's been 5 years now since that night on I-40, and I still drive that same stretch regularly. Every time I pass mile marker 178, I can see those black skid marks from the Tahoe, though they're fading more each year from sun and weather. Sometimes other truckers will get on the CB around that area and ask if I'm the guy from the blockade incident. Word travels in our community. I always tell them the same thing. Trust your gut, maintain your distance, and never assume you're alone out there even when it looks empty. The investigation revealed that crew had successfully hit 11 trucks before they tried for mine, stealing over $3 million in merchandise. Those drivers all said the same thing. It happened so fast they barely had time to react. The only reason I managed to get away was because I'd been paranoid about their synchronized driving for that extra mile before they made their move. That 30 seconds of suspicion probably saved my life, definitely saved the cargo, and helped take down a major theft ring. Though I heard from Officer Murphy last year that similar crews are popping up again, using the same tactics but with motorcycles instead of cars. So yeah, I still drive nights, still haul valuable loads, but now I watch everything and everyone like my life depends on it, because it actually might. I've been driving 18-wheelers for almost 7 years now, and the isolation never really bothered me until that night in late November 2022. Most people think trucking is a man's world, and they're not wrong. Being a 34-year-old woman hauling freight across the country definitely puts me in the minority. I was on a routine run from Denver to Kansas City, carrying a load of furniture that needed to be delivered by morning. The weather had been decent, just cold and dry, and I'd been making good time on I-70. Around 2 in the morning, my body started demanding a break. I'd already pushed past my usual stopping point because I wanted to stay on schedule, but my eyes were getting heavy and my lower back was screaming from sitting in the same position for hours. There was this little rest stop about 40 miles east of Colby that I'd used before. Nothing fancy, just a small parking area with restrooms, a couple of vending machines, and one of those old coffee machines that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. The place was nearly empty when I pulled in, which wasn't unusual for that time of night. There was an old Peterbilt parked at the far end with its lights off, probably another driver catching some sleep, and a beat-up sedan near the restroom building. I parked my Freightliner closer to the building than I normally would because the overhead light near the entrance was flickering, creating these weird shadows that made the whole place feel like a scene from a bad horror movie. I grabbed my jacket, my phone, and made sure my pocket knife was clipped to my jeans, standard procedure when you're a woman alone at night. The cold hit me hard when I stepped out of the cab, that sharp plains wind that cuts right through you no matter how many layers you're wearing. I did a quick walk around my truck first, checking the tires and making sure my load was still secure, then headed toward the building. The restroom was exactly as glamorous as you'd expect. Cracked tiles, a mirror so scratched you could barely see your reflection, and that overwhelming smell of industrial disinfectant trying to mask something worse. But it was functional, and that's all that mattered. After washing up, I headed over to the vending area where that ancient coffee machine sat humming against the wall. The thing looked like it belonged in a museum, one of those old models with the paper cups that drop down and fill while you watch through a grimy plastic window. I fed it a couple of quarters and waited while it made all sorts of concerning noises before finally producing something that vaguely resembled coffee. It tasted like burnt rubber mixed with battery acid, but it was hot and had caffeine, which was all I needed to make it through the last stretch of my route. I stood there for a minute, sipping that awful coffee and stretching my legs, looking out through the glass doors at my rig sitting under that flickering light. The sedan I'd noticed earlier was still there, but now I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, just a dark silhouette barely visible through the windshield. Something about the way they were positioned bothered me. Too still, too focused on the building entrance. But truckers see all kinds of weird stuff at rest stops, and I'd learned not to be paranoid about every little thing. I tossed the half-empty cup in the trash and pushed through the doors, already calculating how many hours I had left to drive and whether I'd need to stop again before Kansas City. The cold air felt good after the stuffy restroom building, and I took a deep breath, ready to get back on the road. That's when I heard it. The sound of an engine starting up, not the sedan, but something bigger. A white van I hadn't noticed before was parked on the other side of the building, hidden in the shadows where the overhead lights didn't reach. It pulled out slowly at first, like the driver was just leaving, but then the headlights swung toward me and the engine revved hard. The van accelerated across the parking lot, tires squealing on the cold asphalt, and came to a violent stop right between me and my truck, maybe 15 feet away from where I was standing. The side door was already sliding open before the vehicle had completely stopped moving, and two men jumped out, one tall and lanky wearing a faded denim jacket, the other shorter but built like a linebacker in a black hoodie. They moved with purpose, like they'd done this before, spreading out to cut off any escape route I might try to take. The tall one was already reaching for me, his face partially hidden under a baseball cap, but I could see his mouth moving, saying something I couldn't hear over the blood pounding in my ears. Every self-defense class I'd ever taken, every warning my mother had given me about traveling alone, every horror story I'd heard from other female truckers, it all crystallized in that moment. I didn't scream, didn't waste time trying to reason with them. Instead, I pivoted hard to my left, using the momentum to slam my elbow into the tall one's ribs as he lunged forward. He grunted and stumbled, giving me just enough space to move. The shorter one was faster than he looked, though, and his thick fingers caught my jacket sleeve, yanking me backward with enough force to nearly pull me off my feet. I could smell cigarettes and something sour on him, like old beer and sweat. Without thinking, I drove my boot heel down hard on his instep while simultaneously twisting my body and ripping my arm free, leaving my jacket in his grip. The few seconds of confusion gave me a tiny window, and I took it. I sprinted toward my truck, my boots slipping on patches of frost on the asphalt. Behind me, I could hear them cursing and their footsteps pounding after me. The tall one had recovered and was gaining ground, those long legs of his eating up the distance between us. My truck seemed impossibly far away, that flickering overhead light making everything look distorted and unreal. I reached for my keys while running, thanking God I always kept them clipped to my belt loop instead of in my pocket. The key fob was in my hand, and I was hitting the unlock button repeatedly, hearing that beautiful chirp of my locks disengaging. Just as I reached the driver's side, Fingers grabbed at my shirt from behind, getting a handful of fabric. I spun around, using the motion to swing my fist wildly, catching somebody. I think it was the tall one, somewhere in the face. I heard him swear, and felt his grip loosen just enough for me to wrench free and grab the door handle. I hauled myself up into the cab with strength I didn't know I had, my muscles running on pure adrenaline. The shorter one had circled around and was trying to climb up on the passenger side, his meaty fists pounding on the window while the tall one grabbed at my leg as I pulled it inside. I kicked out hard, my boot connecting with something solid, his shoulder or chest maybe, and yanked the door shut so hard the whole cab shook. The automatic locks engaged with a solid thunk that was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. They were both at my door now, the tall one's face pressed against the window, his breath fogging up the glass while he shouted things that made my stomach turn. The shorter one was pulling on the door handle over and over, like somehow it might magically open if he just kept trying. Their van was still running behind them, exhaust visible in the cold air, the side door still hanging open like a mouth waiting to swallow someone whole. I fumbled for my phone with trembling fingers, managing to dial 911 while simultaneously starting my truck's engine. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, asking me my location, and I had to force myself to speak clearly, even though every instinct was screaming at me to just drive, to get away from these men who were still circling my truck like wolves. The tall one had produced something from his pocket. It looked like a slim gem or some kind of tool, and was working it around my doorframe while his partner kept watch. I told the dispatcher what was happening, reading off the mile marker I'd memorized from the rest stop entrance, describing the men and their van while trying to keep my voice steady. She told me units were already on their way, that a state trooper was less than 10 minutes out, but 10 minutes felt like a lifetime when someone was actively trying to break into your truck. I threw the transmission into gear, ready to run them over if I had to, when I noticed something that made everything even worse. The sedan I'd seen earlier, the one with the person watching the building, it had pulled up behind my trailer, blocking me in. The driver was out now, and in the flickering light I could see it was a woman, thin and nervous looking, keeping watch while the two men continued their assault on my cab. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. These people were a team, and I'd walked right into their trap. The dispatcher was still on the line, and I could hear her relaying information to the responding units, her voice a lifeline keeping me grounded while chaos erupted around me. The tall one's tool scraped against metal as he worked it deeper into the door frame, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he figured out the right angle to pop the lock. The truck's engine was running, rumbling beneath me like a caged animal, and I made a decision. I laid on the air horn, holding it down with my full weight, the deafening blast echoing across the empty plains. The sound was so loud it made my ears ring, but I didn't let up. The men stepped back, startled, covering their ears, and that's when I saw my chance. I released the brakes and started rolling forward slowly, even though the sedan was behind me. The woman saw what I was doing and scrambled back toward her car, probably realizing that my 18-wheeler would crush that little sedan like a tin can if I decided to reverse. The shorter man pounded on my hood with both fists, his face twisted in rage, while the tall one ran back toward their van, maybe going for a weapon or maybe deciding this wasn't worth it anymore. I kept the horn going in short, rhythmic blasts, 3 long, 3 short, 3 long, SOS in Morse code, hoping maybe that other trucker in the Peterbilt would hear it and understand. The dispatcher was asking me questions, but I could barely hear her over the horn and my own heartbeat. Then I saw them, red and blue lights in the distance coming fast down the interstate. The moment those lights became visible, everything changed. The woman was already back in her sedan, tires spinning as she peeled out of the parking lot. The two men ran for their van, the tall one slipping on the icy asphalt and nearly falling before catching himself on the vehicle's side mirror. They didn't even bother closing the sliding door before the van lurched forward, making a hard turn toward the exit. I gave the dispatcher the license plate number as they fled. It was from Nebraska, probably stolen, but at least it was something. The state trooper's cruiser came screaming into the rest stop less than 30 seconds after they'd gone, followed quickly by another unit. My whole body was shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a wall. The trooper, a middle-aged black woman named Officer Washington, had to talk to me through the window for a full minute before I felt safe enough to unlock the door and step out. She was patient and professional, checking me over for injuries while her partner secured the scene and called for additional units to search for the van. My shirt was torn where the tall one had grabbed me, and I had scratches on my arms I didn't even remember getting. Officer Washington had me sit in her cruiser, where it was warm while I gave my statement, going through every detail I could remember. The denim jacket, the black hoodie, the woman's nervous movements, that Nebraska plate. She took photos of the scratches on my truck's doorframe where they'd tried to break in, and bagged my torn jacket that the shorter one had pulled off me during the struggle. What she told me next made me realize just how lucky I'd been. They'd been tracking this group for weeks, at least 4 attempted abductions along I-70 and I-80, all targeting women traveling alone at remote rest stops during late-night hours. 2 women were still missing. The method was always the same. The woman would arrive first in the sedan, acting as a spotter, identifying potential victims and making sure there weren't too many witnesses around. Once she gave the signal, the van would move in for the grab. They'd gotten sloppy with me, though, maybe because I was in a truck and they thought I'd be an easy mark once I was out in the open, or maybe because they were getting desperate. Officer Washington said my fight, and the noise I made probably saved my life. Most victims had been grabbed before they could react, pulled into that van and gone before anyone knew what had happened. She kept me there for another 2 hours, going through mugshots on her laptop, coordinating with other departments, making sure I was okay to drive. By the time she finally cleared me to leave, the sun was starting to come up, painting the Kansas plains in shades of orange and pink. I made my delivery 6 hours late, my hands still trembling slightly as I signed the paperwork. The client complained about the delay until they saw the police report number I handed them along with their invoice. They caught them 3 days later at a rest stop near North Platte, trying the same thing with another woman who'd thankfully seen the news report about my encounter and immediately locked herself in her car and called 911. The woman with the sedan turned out to be the girlfriend of the tall one, Nancy Garrett, a former nursing student who'd lost her license for stealing drugs. The shorter man was her cousin, Walter Briggs, with a record going back 15 years for assault, robbery, and kidnapping. The tall one, her boyfriend James Lawson, was the worst of them, connected to human trafficking rings operating across 3 states. I had to testify at their trial 8 months later, sitting in that courtroom and looking at them again, this time in orange jumpsuits and shackles. Nancy got 12 years, Walter got 20, and James got life without parole. They found one of the missing women because of evidence in that van, alive but barely, locked in a basement in Iowa. The other woman was never found. I still drive trucks, still make that Denver to Kansas City run sometimes, but I've never stopped at that rest area again. I installed extra locks on my cab doors and started carrying pepper spray alongside my knife. Some nights when I'm driving alone and see a white van in my mirrors, my chest gets tight, and I have to remind myself to breathe. But I won't let them take this job from me. This is my life, my freedom, and I'll be damned if I let 3 pieces of garbage make me afraid of the open road. "15 years behind the wheel of big rigs teaches you a lot about reading people and situations, especially when you're alone on dark highways. That September night in 2017, my old Kenworth was loaded with electronics heading for Newark, grinding along Route 80 through Pennsylvania. The divorce papers were fresh in my glove compartment, signed just that week, and honestly, the endless stretch of asphalt was the only therapy I needed. Just me, 60,000 pounds of cargo, and the steady rumble of the diesel keeping me company through the darkness. Night driving had always been my preference anyway. Fewer idiots on the road, better delivery times, and something almost meditative about watching mile markers disappear while the rest of the world slept. Must have stopped at that Clarion truck stop 50 times over the years. Always the same routine: fuel up, grab coffee, check the load, keep moving. The fuel needle was kissing empty when I finally pulled off the highway around 2 a.m., and my kidneys were screaming after 6 hours straight in the driver's seat. The lot was dead quiet for a Thursday night. Maybe 5 or 6 trucks scattered around, all dark except for the soft glow of sleeper cab lights here and there. The overhead fluorescents at the diesel pumps kept flickering and buzzing, making everything look like it was underwater, shadows jumping around in ways that made no sense. That's when I noticed him. This figure standing about 20 feet from the pumps, just barely inside the edge of the light, holding what looked like a piece of cardboard. He wasn't pacing or waving at trucks like hitchhikers usually do. Wasn't even moving at all, really. Just standing there like a statue, wearing this thick canvas work jacket that must have been suffocating in the humid September air. His sign just said, "East" in black marker. Nothing else, no destination, no plea for help, just that one word. My first instinct was to ignore him completely, just fuel up and get back on the road. But something about how still he was standing there got under my skin in a weird way. While the diesel pump clicked away, filling my tanks, I kept glancing at him through my side mirror. The guy never shifted his weight, never looked at other trucks pulling in, just kept staring straight ahead at nothing in particular. His face was hard to make out in the bad lighting, but I could tell he was maybe mid-40s, clean-shaven, with this peculiar scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, pale and thick like a worm. When the pump finally clicked off, I was putting the nozzle back when he started walking toward me. Not rushed, but purposeful, like he'd been waiting specifically for me to finish. His boots made no sound on the concrete, which seemed impossible given how heavy they looked. "Need a ride east," he said when he got close enough, and his voice had this flat quality to it, like someone reading lines they'd memorized but didn't understand. Up close, I could see his eyes were this washed-out gray color, barely any pupil visible, and he had this habit of not blinking that made maintaining eye contact uncomfortable as hell. The jacket he wore had old stains on it, dark patches that could have been oil or something else, and it smelled like copper pennies mixed with diesel exhaust. I told him I was only going as far as Brookville, maybe 40 miles up the road, figuring that would discourage him since most hitchhikers want longer hauls. But he just nodded once, said, "That works," and started walking toward the passenger side of my cab without waiting for me to actually agree to anything. Something in my gut twisted up tight, every instinct telling me to just drive away, leave him standing there. But I'd given rides before, plenty of times, and what kind of person would I be leaving someone stranded at 2 a.m.? He climbed up into the cab with surprising agility for someone wearing such heavy boots, settling into the passenger seat like he belonged there. The interior light stayed on for those few seconds while the door was open, and I got a better look at his hands. They were completely hairless, even on the knuckles, with fingernails filed down to nothing and skin that looked almost waxy under the dome light. He didn't have any bag or belongings with him, which struck me as odd for someone hitchhiking long distance. As I pulled out of the truck stop and merged back onto the highway, he sat there perfectly straight, not leaning back against the seat, hands placed flat on his thighs like he was posing for a photograph. The CB radio crackled with static, and I noticed the temperature gauge starting to act funny, dropping and rising even though the engine temp was steady. About 5 miles down the road, he finally spoke again, asking what I was hauling, and when I told him electronics, he made this sound that wasn't quite a laugh, more like someone clearing their throat. "Electronics," he repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign to him. "Expensive cargo, probably insured for what, 100,000, maybe more?" The questions made my neck tense up because that's not something you ask a driver you just met. That's information thieves want to know. Then he asked if I had a regular route, if I always drove alone, if anyone was tracking my progress tonight. Each question came out in that same flat tone, no emotion behind it, like he was checking boxes on some mental list. The way he never looked at me while talking, just stared straight ahead at the dark highway. made the whole conversation feel like an interrogation. I kept my answers vague, lied about having to check in with dispatch every hour, mentioned my cousin was meeting me in Brookville to take over the driving. He nodded at each lie like he knew exactly what I was doing, and then asked if I had any weapons in the truck. Said it just like that, casual as asking about the weather. My mouth went dry as sand, and I gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache. Told him I had a tire iron under the seat. Nothing more, even though my .38 was sitting in the sleeper compartment right behind us. He made that throat-clearing sound again and shifted slightly in his seat, the first real movement he'd made since getting in. That's when I noticed his reflection in the passenger window wasn't matching his movements quite right, like there was a half-second delay between what he did and what the glass showed. "Tire iron," he said slowly, like he was filing that information away. "Useful tool. Can open a skull like a coconut if you hit it right." The casual way he said it, like discussing a recipe or sports score, made my chest tighten up. We passed a sign saying Brookville was 25 miles ahead, and I started calculating if I could make it that far. Started thinking about pulling into the next well-lit area and making up some excuse about engine trouble. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, slow and deliberate, and I tensed up ready to grab for my pistol if needed. But he pulled out this old flip phone, the kind nobody uses anymore, and started pressing buttons without actually calling anyone. The screen wasn't even lit up, but he held it to his ear and started talking to nobody, giving someone directions to our exact location, describing my truck down to the license plate number I hadn't told him. Blue Kenworth, Pennsylvania plates, driver's about 6 foot, heavy set, wearing a Steelers cap, he said into the dead phone. And I wasn't wearing a Steelers cap, had never owned one. But when I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror, there it was, sitting on my head like it had always been there. My actual John Deere cap was nowhere to be seen. He continued his fake conversation, mentioned the mile marker we'd just passed, said 15 minutes, and closed the phone with a snap that sounded like breaking bones. The next 10 miles felt like 100, every shadow on the side of the road looking like another person waiting. Every set of headlights in my mirrors seeming to follow too close for too long. He'd gone back to sitting statue still, but now he was humming something tuneless under his breath, just 3 notes repeated over and over, and the sound was drilling into my brain like a dentist's tool. I kept checking the clock on the dashboard, watching those 15 minutes count down, wondering what would happen when they hit 0. At 12 minutes, I saw an exit coming up with a gas station sign, one of those bright Shell stations that's always busy, and I made a split-second decision to pull off, started flipping my turn signal. "No," he said, not loud but firm, and his hand moved to rest on the gear shifter between us, not grabbing it but just placing his palm on top like a warning. "Brookville. You said Brookville." His fingers were ice cold even through my thermal glove when they brushed against my hand, cold like they'd been soaking in freezer water. I pushed his hand away and yanked the wheel toward the exit anyway, but the truck wouldn't respond right, like the steering column had locked up. The exit ramp flew past while I fought with the wheel, the truck staying perfectly in its lane like it was on rails. "Mechanical problems," he said in that flat voice. Not a question, but a statement. "Happens sometimes with these older models. Steering just gives out. But I knew my truck, knew every sound and shake it made, and this wasn't mechanical failure. The wheel was turning fine. The truck just wasn't listening to it. The speedometer showed we were doing exactly 55, but looking out the window, the trees were flying by like we were doing 90. My GPS started recalculating constantly, the little voice saying, rerouting, over and over until I switched it off. Then I saw them in the mirror, 2 sets of headlights that had been pacing us for the last 5 miles, keeping perfect distance, never falling back or getting closer. He must have noticed me looking because he said, "Friends of yours?" and made that not quite laugh sound again. That's when I decided to hell with it all and reached back for my pistol, figuring whatever happened next couldn't be worse than what they had planned. But my hand hit empty air. The sleeper compartment wasn't there anymore. just a solid wall of metal like it had never existed. The entire back section of my cab had somehow vanished, turned into smooth steel. He watched me realize this with those unblinking gray eyes and said, "Funny how memory plays tricks. You sure you ever had a sleeper back there?" The Brookville exit sign appeared in my headlights, and without me touching anything, the truck started slowing down, the turn signal clicking on by itself. The two cars behind us moved into formation, one sliding into the left lane, one staying right, boxing us in as we headed down the exit ramp. My cell phone in the cup holder went dead, screen black, wouldn't turn back on no matter how many times I pressed the power button. The exit ramp seemed to go on forever, curving into darkness where no lights were visible, even though I knew there should be a flying J right at the bottom. "Here's what happens now," he said, his voice different suddenly, more animated, more real than it had been the entire ride. "You're going to pull into that warehouse up ahead, the one with the broken windows and the red door. You're going to back your trailer up to loading dock 3. Some people are going to unload your cargo, take about 20 minutes. Then you're going to drive away and forget this ever happened. You won't call the police, won't file an insurance claim, won't even remember what I look like by morning." The warehouse materialized out of the darkness exactly as he described it, abandoned looking but with fresh tire tracks in the gravel lot. The two cars pulled in behind us, their lights going dark simultaneously. I thought about ramming the building, jackknifing the trailer. Anything to stop this, but my arms wouldn't obey, just kept steering exactly where he wanted. As we pulled up to the loading dock, I saw more figures emerging from the shadows, all wearing the same heavy canvas jackets, all moving with that same unnatural stillness between motions. The unloading took exactly 20 minutes, like he said, those figures working in perfect coordination. No talking, no wasted movements, just box after box disappearing into the warehouse. I sat there unable to move, unable to even turn my head, just watching in the mirrors as my entire load vanished. The whole time he sat next to me humming those same 3 notes, occasionally checking that dead flip phone like it was showing him something I couldn't see. When they finished, one of the figures slapped the back of my trailer twice and suddenly I could move again, my arms and legs tingling like they'd been asleep. "Drive," he said simply, and I did, backing out of the dock and heading toward the exit. But something in me snapped then, maybe desperation or just pure anger at being made helpless in my own truck. I grabbed the tire iron from under my seat, the one thing that was still where it should be, and swung it at him hard as I could while driving. The iron went right through him like he was made of smoke, clanging against the passenger door, and he turned to look at me with something that might have been disappointment. "Should have just kept driving," he said. And then he was gone, just vanished like he'd never been there at all. The Steelers cap was gone too, my John Deere one back on my head, the sleeper compartment behind me like normal, my .38 right where I'd left it. Even the smell of copper and diesel was gone, replaced by the usual scent of coffee and air freshener. I pulled over at the real Flying J at the bottom of the real Brookville exit, the one that had always been there, and called the police with shaking fingers. They found my cargo 3 states away a week later, most of it already sold off, but the warehouse I described didn't exist, never had according to county records. The security footage from the Clarion truck stop showed me pulling in for fuel, but there was nobody at the pumps, no hitchhiker. Just me standing there for 3 minutes talking to empty air before getting in my truck and driving away alone. They think I was in on it, of course, that I staged the whole thing for insurance money, but the charges didn't stick because they couldn't figure out how I did it. I don't drive trucks anymore. I work at a hardware store in Ohio now, and I never pick up hitchhikers, never stop at that Clarion exit, and I definitely never drive at night. Sometimes I still hear those 3 notes he was humming, usually when I'm about to fall asleep, and I wonder if he was ever really there, or if something else entirely happened that night, something my mind won't let me remember correctly. The night everything went sideways, I was hauling 40,000 pounds of packaged foods from Nevada down to Houston in my beat-up Kenworth. 8 years of driving trucks had taught me plenty about reading dangerous situations. And at 34, I was one of maybe a dozen female long-haul drivers who regularly worked that brutal desert corridor. It was August 2015, and the heat was absolutely punishing even after dark, making the asphalt shimmer like water under my headlights. My rig was this faded blue beast that I'd bought at auction and rebuilt myself. The paint job so weathered, it turned purple under fluorescent lights. I'd been wrestling the wheel for 14 hours straight, my shoulders screaming and my eyes burning from the glare of oncoming traffic, when I finally decided to stop at this enormous truck stop just outside Amarillo. The place was massive, one of those complexes with 50-some fuel pumps, a full-service diner that claimed to have the best chicken fried steak in Texas, hot showers that actually had decent water pressure, and a convenience store that never closed its doors. I always remembered this particular stop because the main neon sign had been broken for years, displaying Fuel Center instead of Fuel Center, which never failed to make me smile despite my exhaustion. When I pulled in around 12:30 that morning, the lot was packed with way more trucks than usual for that time of night. At least 30 big rigs were scattered across the cracked asphalt, engines idling in a constant low hum that mixed with the buzz of insects drawn to the overhead lights. I maneuvered into a spot on the eastern edge of the lot, strategic enough to keep the building in sight, but far enough from other trucks to give me room to pull out fast if necessary. A habit every female driver develops after enough close calls at rest stops. After pumping diesel and grabbing what had to be the most disgusting cup of coffee ever brewed, imagine burnt motor oil mixed with chalk, I climbed back into my cab to deal with the electronic logging system and maintenance reports the company demanded every single night. The dome light in my cab created this isolated yellow glow against the darkness outside, and I had my driver's side window cracked about 2 inches to let some air circulate, because even at night the temperature was still hovering around 90 degrees. I was typing notes into my tablet about a slow leak in the rear passenger side tire, and documenting that strange, grinding noise the transmission had started making near El Paso, when I heard footsteps crunching through the gravel right beside my door. The knocking came soft at first, almost polite, 3 gentle taps that barely registered over the idling engines around me. Through my side mirror, I could see a woman standing there, maybe mid-20s, wearing this oversized gray hoodie despite the heat and jeans that looked too clean for someone who'd been dealing with car trouble. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had these huge hoop earrings that caught the light from the parking lot's sodium lamps. Something about her posture seemed rehearsed, like an actress who'd memorized her blocking, but hadn't quite nailed the performance yet. She knocked again, harder this time, and called out in this high, sweet voice that carried a slight southern drawl, saying her car had broken down about a quarter mile up the road, and her phone was dead, and could I please help her call someone. The way she emphasized certain words felt calculated, like she was trying too hard to sound distressed without actually being distressed. Her hand stayed visible the whole time, pressed against my door like she wanted me to see she wasn't holding anything dangerous. I kept the door locked and rolled my window down another inch, just enough to talk without giving her any way to reach inside. From this angle, I could see more details. Her makeup was perfect, not a smudge of mascara despite claiming she'd walked here in the dark from a breakdown, and her white sneakers were pristine, not a speck of dust on them. She started rambling about how scared she was, alone out here at night, how she'd seen my cab light on and figured another woman would understand and help her out, wouldn't leave her stranded in such a dangerous place. But while she was talking, her eyes kept darting to something beyond my truck, toward the back corner of the lot where the lights didn't quite reach. I adjusted my passenger mirror to get a better view, and that's when I saw them. 2 men standing by a dark sedan parked between 2 semi-trailers, maybe 60 yards away, just standing there perfectly still, watching us. One was tall and skinny, wearing what looked like a baseball cap, and the other was shorter, stockier, hands in his pockets, both of them positioned where they could move fast if they needed to. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. but I forced myself to stay calm and keep my face neutral. I told the woman I'd be happy to call someone for her from inside the truck stop, that she should go wait by the main entrance where it was well lit, and there were security cameras. She immediately switched tactics, her voice dropping the sweet act and becoming more insistent, saying she couldn't walk anymore because her ankle was twisted, that she really needed to sit down. Couldn't I just open the door and let her use my phone for one quick call? Her right hand moved to the door handle and gave it a testing pull while her left hand pressed flat against the window, leaving greasy fingerprints on the glass. That's when I noticed her nails, professionally done. These elaborate acrylic tips with tiny rhinestones. Definitely not the nails of someone who'd been struggling with a broken-down car on the side of the highway. She was getting agitated now, her voice rising, saying I was being paranoid and cruel, that women should help each other out, that she couldn't believe I was going to leave her out here alone when those creepy truckers inside had been making comments about her earlier. The two men had started moving, slowly walking toward my truck from different angles, trying to make it look casual but clearly coordinating their approach. The taller one was coming up along the passenger side while the shorter one circled wide to come up behind the trailer, probably thinking I couldn't see him in my mirrors. I reached over and grabbed my phone, making sure the woman could see me dialing, and loudly said I was calling 911 to report a stranded motorist who needed assistance. The change in her expression was instant. The fake desperation vanished and was replaced by this cold fury that made her look like a completely different person. She stepped back from the door and whistled, one sharp note that cut through the night air, and both men stopped in their tracks. Without another word, she turned and walked quickly toward the dark sedan, her supposed twisted ankle mysteriously healed. The men followed her, and within 30 seconds they were peeling out of the lot, tires squealing as they hit the access road. I sat there for probably 5 minutes, just shaking and trying to process what had almost happened. My shirt was soaked through with sweat that had nothing to do with the August heat, and I realized I'd been gripping my phone so tight that my knuckles were white and my fingers were cramping. Part of me wanted to just start driving, get the hell out of there and put miles between me and that place, but I knew I needed to report this before they tried it on someone else. I climbed down from my cab on wobbly legs and walked into the truck stop, heading straight for the counter where a kid who couldn't have been older than 20 was working the night shift. His name tag said Bradley, and he had this terrible attempt at a mustache and acne scars across both cheeks. When I told him what happened, his eyes went wide and he immediately called his manager over. This older woman named Dottie who'd probably been working truck stops since before I was born. She had silver hair and a tight bun and arms like a linebacker, and she listened to my story while pulling up security footage on a monitor behind the counter. Dottie's face went pale when she saw the footage, and she immediately called the state police while making a copy of the video files. Turns out this wasn't the first attempt. She told me they'd had 3 similar incidents in the past month, always late at night, always targeting solo drivers, especially women or elderly men. The woman with the blonde hair had been spotted each time, but she used different stories. Sometimes it was car trouble, sometimes she'd lost her wallet. Once she claimed she was escaping from an abusive boyfriend. The police arrived within 20 minutes, 2 officers who took my statement and watched the security footage several times, zooming in to get clear shots of the woman's face and the license plate of the sedan. They told me I'd done exactly the right thing by not opening my door, that 2 drivers had been robbed at knife point in similar setups at other stops along the interstate, and 1 elderly man had been beaten badly enough to need hospitalization when he'd tried to help what he thought was a stranded young mother with a baby. The officer, a sergeant named Ramirez with graying temples and a thick accent I couldn't quite place, showed me photos on his tablet of items recovered from one of the robbery scenes. There was a knife with a serrated edge about 6 inches long, zip ties that had been cut off of victims' wrists, and a roll of duct tape that made my stomach turn when I thought about what they might have planned to do with it. He said the woman was known to them only as Candy, from one victim who'd overheard the men use that name, though it was obviously fake, and they suspected the group was working their way along Interstate 40, hitting different truck stops every few weeks before moving on to avoid getting caught. The shorter man had a distinctive tattoo on his neck that one victim remembered, a scorpion with its tail curled up, and they'd been driving different vehicles each time, probably stolen or borrowed specifically for these robberies. Ramirez gave me his card and said a detective would follow up with me in a few days, that I might need to identify them in a lineup if they were caught, and he strongly suggested I consider carrying pepper spray or some other legal form of protection. After the police left, Dottie insisted on walking me back to my truck, this tough old woman marching beside me with a baseball bat she kept behind the counter, her eyes scanning the lot like a guard dog protecting its territory. She told me she'd been working that truck stop for 18 years and had seen all kinds of bad situations. But something about this crew particularly bothered her because they were getting bolder and more aggressive with each attempt. Before I climbed back into my cab, she grabbed my arm and told me to wait while she called over 2 other drivers she knew, regulars named Bill and Antoine, who often ran the same routes I did. They agreed to convoy with me for the next 100 miles until we reached a bigger city where I'd feel safer. And I've never been more grateful for the unspoken brotherhood among truckers who look out for each other. Bill drove an old International with Christmas lights strung around his cab year-round, and Antoine had this gorgeous black Western Star with chrome everything, and seeing them pull out ahead and behind me like protective escorts made me finally start breathing normally again. We drove through the rest of that night and into the morning, keeping a steady pace and checking in with each other on the CB every 30 minutes or so. Bill kept making these terrible jokes to keep my spirits up. Stuff about how that woman probably needed the money for acting lessons because her performance was garbage, while Antoine shared stories about close calls he'd had over his 20 years on the road. Around dawn, we stopped at a well-lit Love's truck stop near Oklahoma City, where they both insisted on checking my truck for any tracking devices the criminals might have stuck on it while I was distracted. Apparently, that was becoming a common tactic to follow victims to more isolated locations. They didn't find anything, but the fact that they thought to look showed just how sophisticated these robbery crews were becoming. Before we parted ways, Antoine gave me a small canister of bear spray he kept in his cab, technically illegal to use on humans but better than nothing, and Bill programmed his personal cell number into my phone with strict instructions to call if I ever felt unsafe at a stop again. I made it to Houston without any other incidents and delivered my load on schedule, but that night changed how I approach my job forever. Now I never work on paperwork with my cab light on at night. I use a small red flashlight that doesn't broadcast my location to everyone in the parking lot. I installed better locks on my doors and a security camera system that records everything around my truck, uploading to the cloud in case something happens to the physical equipment. I joined an online network of female truckers, where we share real-time updates about dangerous stops and suspicious situations, and I've helped 4 other women avoid similar setups by warning them about specific locations and tactics. About 6 months later, I got a call from that detective saying they'd arrested the crew in New Mexico after they'd tried the same scam on an off-duty cop who was driving his personal vehicle. The woman, whose real name turned out to be Ashley Donovan, got 7 years, and the 2 men got 12 each because of the weapons charges. But here's what still bothers me. During the trial, it came out that they'd successfully robbed at least 15 drivers before they were caught, and Ashley testified that they specifically targeted women drivers because, in her words, they're more likely to want to help another woman in distress. That feeling of betrayal, of having someone weaponize the instinct to help each other, that's what stays with me more than the fear. "6 years behind the wheel of a big rig teaches you a lot about solitude. That Monday in March 2023, I was pushing my 18-wheeler down Interstate 95, somewhere in that empty stretch between Jacksonville and Miami, with 40,000 pounds of electronics rattling in my trailer. Around 2 a.m., the highway becomes a different world, just truckers and the occasional speed demon racing toward morning. My wife Gloria always got anxious about these overnight runs, kept saying the darkness brought out the worst in people. I'd tell her she was being paranoid, that nothing ever happens on these long hauls except maybe seeing a gator crossing the road. God, how wrong I was. That particular stretch of I-95 runs through miles of nothing, swampland on both sides, no exits for 20 miles in either direction, just you and the hum of diesel and whatever's lurking out there in the Florida darkness. My whole world shifted with one violent explosion of rubber. The steering wheel jerked in my grip like it was trying to escape, and I felt the entire trailer swing sideways as the blown tire grabbed at the pavement. 40 tons of steel and cargo doesn't stop easy, especially when you're doing 65, and one of your trailer tires decides to shred itself to pieces. I fought that wheel with everything I had, pumping the brakes just enough to slow down without jackknifing, feeling the rig shudder and groan as I guided it toward the shoulder. When I finally got it stopped and climbed down with my flashlight, the damage was obvious. The tire wasn't just flat, it was destroyed. Long strips of rubber scattered across 200 feet of highway. The rim had carved a deep groove in the asphalt before I'd managed to stop. I set out my reflective triangles, knowing I was in for a long wait. Eddie from dispatch picked up on the second ring when I called, said the service truck would need at least 2 hours to reach me from Miami. As I ended the call, I caught movement in my mirror. Headlights approaching, slowing down, pulling off the road behind me. The car was a beat-up sedan, maybe a early 2000s Camry, painted that faded silver color that could have been any car anywhere. But something about how it parked bothered me. Not behind my truck where someone helping would stop, but at an angle, blocking any chance I had of pulling forward if I needed to leave quick. 2 men got out, and right away, every instinct I'd developed in 6 years of night driving started screaming. The driver was tall, maybe 6'3", wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a jacket too heavy for Florida, even at night. His passenger was shorter, stockier, with a beard that hadn't seen a trim in months and eyes that kept darting between me and my trailer. They walked toward me with this fake casualness, like they were trying too hard to seem helpful. The tall one raised his hand in a wave, smiled, showing too many teeth, and called out asking if I needed help. But his eyes weren't looking at me or the blown tire. They were locked on the trailer doors. "Rough night, huh?" the tall one said, his voice carrying that forced friendliness that makes your gut tighten. He introduced himself as Carl, said his buddy was Jerome, and they were heading home from a late shift at the port. But their clothes were too clean for dock workers, and there was no company logo on that sedan. Nothing that suggested they'd just finished any kind of honest work. Jerome walked past me toward the back of the trailer, running his hand along the side like he was checking for damage. But I knew he was feeling for the lock, testing how secure it was. Carl kept talking, asking what I was hauling, where I was headed, if anyone was expecting me soon. Each question felt like he was putting together a puzzle, figuring out how much time they had. When I mentioned Eddie knowing my exact location, and that the service truck had GPS tracking on my rig, Carl's expression flickered for just a second, a flash of calculation that told me everything I needed to know about why they'd really stopped. Jerome had made his way completely around the trailer by now, and I could hear him tugging at the lock mechanism, not even trying to be subtle anymore. The padlock I used was a heavy-duty Abus, one of those German-made ones that cost me nearly $200. But watching Jerome pull a small crowbar from inside his jacket made that investment seem pretty worthless. Carl saw me notice and stepped closer, close enough that I could smell stale cigarettes and something chemical on his breath, maybe meth. "Electronics, right?" he said, not really asking. "Bet there's what? Couple $100,000 worth of phones and laptops in there? That's a lot of weight for one man to be carrying all alone out here." His hand moved to his hip, pushing back his jacket just enough to show the handle of something tucked into his waistband. Not quite pulling it, but making sure I saw it. The math was simple. 2 of them, 1 of me, and the nearest help at least 90 minutes away. I started backing toward my cab, trying to keep it smooth, natural, like I was just going to check something. But Carl moved with me, maintaining that same uncomfortable distance, while Jerome gave up any pretense and started working the crowbar against the lock housing. "Where you going, driver?" Carl asked, his fake friendly tone completely gone now. "We're just trying to help you out here." Maybe we can work something out, you know. Insurance covers theft, right? You could say someone broke in while you were waiting for repairs. Hell, we could even rough you up a little. Make it look good for the report. The way he said it, like he was doing me a favor, made my skin prickle with sweat despite the cool night air. I kept moving backward, my hand reaching behind me for the cab door handle, calculating whether I could get inside and lock it before Carl reached that weapon. Jerome had given up on the lock and was now examining the door hinges, and I realized with a sick feeling that they'd done this before, probably many times. My fingers found the door handle just as Carl lunged forward. I yanked it open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut as his fist connected with the window. The automatic locks engaged with a click that sounded like salvation. Carl's face pressed against the glass, no longer pretending to be anything but what he was, a predator who'd just lost his prey. He pulled out what I could now see was a Glock, tapping it against the window, almost playfully. "Bulletproof?" he asked, knowing damn well most truck windows aren't. But he didn't shoot. Out here, sound travels far, and even these two seemed to understand that gunshots would bring attention they didn't want. Jerome appeared on the passenger side, trying the door handle, then picked up a rock from the shoulder. I grabbed my phone, hand steady now that I had steel between us, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered just as Jerome threw the rock. The passenger window spiderwebbed but held, thank God for laminated glass. "Break-in in progress, Interstate 95 southbound, mile marker 247, I said, loud enough for Carl and Jerome to hear every word. "Two men trying to break into my truck and steal my cargo, armed with a handgun." The dispatcher started asking questions, and I kept my voice clear and steady, describing Carl and Jerome, their sedan, reading off the license plate I'd memorized when they first pulled up. Carl's face changed as he realized I wasn't just calling for help. I was creating a record, evidence, turning them from anonymous thieves into wanted men with descriptions and a paper trail. Jerome dropped the rock and backed away from the truck, yelling something at Carl I couldn't make out over the diesel engine's idle. Through the dispatcher, I could hear radio chatter as units were contacted. "Closest unit is about 15 minutes out," she said, and I watched Carl's jaw clench as he heard it too. 15 minutes isn't long unless you're trying to break into a locked trailer and get away with $200,000 in electronics. Carl made one last attempt, walking around to the driver's side again, the gun now tucked away. He knocked on the window almost politely, gesturing for me to roll it down. When I shook my head, he leaned close to the glass and spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "You got lucky tonight, driver. But you know what? We know your truck number. We know what company you drive for. Trucks break down all the time on these empty stretches. Maybe next time you won't be so lucky." The threat hung in the air between us, and for a moment I actually considered whether reporting this was worth potentially becoming a target. But then I saw Jerome already heading back to their sedan, clearly not interested in being there when the cops arrived. Carl held my stare for another few seconds, memorizing my face the same way I'd memorized his, then slowly backed away. They didn't peel out or drive erratically. They just pulled back onto the highway and disappeared into the darkness, probably taking the next exit to disappear into the maze of back roads. I stayed on with the dispatcher until I saw the blue and red lights approaching from the north. 2 state troopers pulled up, both of them taking the situation seriously once they saw the damaged window and the marks on my trailer lock. Officer Daniels, a woman who looked like she'd seen every scam and scheme this highway had to offer, took my statement while her partner photographed everything. She told me I'd done everything right, stayed in the cab, called immediately, got good descriptions. "That license plate you gave us," she said, checking her tablet, "stolen from a parking lot in Orlando 3 days ago. These guys are professionals." She gave me her card, said a detective would follow up, but we both knew the chances of catching Carl and Jerome were slim. They'd probably already ditched the car and the plates. What stuck with me, though, was when she mentioned they'd had 4 similar incidents in the last month, all targeting trucks with electronic cargo, all along this same stretch of I-95. The service truck finally arrived about 20 minutes after the cops left, and I watched the mechanic change my tire while replaying everything in my head. He made small talk about how dangerous this stretch of road had gotten, mentioned he'd been called out to 3 suspicious breakdowns just that week. That detail made me wonder, were Carl and Jerome somehow causing the flats? It wouldn't be hard to scatter some debris on the road, wait for a truck to hit it, then follow at a distance until the driver pulled over. The mechanic, a guy named Luis who'd been doing this for 20 years, said he'd started carrying pepper spray after one call-out turned sketchy. By the time I got rolling again, it was nearly 5 a.m., and the sky was starting to lighten in the east. I made my delivery in Miami, but I couldn't stop checking my mirrors, looking for that silver sedan or any car that seemed to be following too close. The warehouse workers unloaded those electronics like any other day, completely unaware that their phones and laptops had almost ended up on the black market. I still drive that route, but everything's different now. Got myself a concealed carry permit the week after the incident, and I keep a loaded .38 in the cab, legal and registered. The company installed better locks on all their trailers, the kind that would take a lot more than a crowbar to break. But the biggest change is internal. That comfortable feeling of solitude I used to enjoy on night drives is gone, replaced by a constant vigilance that exhausts me more than the long hours ever did. Gloria was right about the darkness bringing out the worst in people. Sometimes I think about Carl's threat, wonder if he and Jerome are still out there, watching for truck number 4847 to break down again. The state police never caught them, and those incidents along I-95 continued for another 2 months before suddenly stopping. Maybe they got arrested for something else, or maybe they just moved their operations somewhere else. All I know is that every time I hear that telltale thump of a tire problem, my hand instinctively moves toward that 38, and I'm already scanning for the nearest exit, the closest place with lights and people, because I learned that night that on these empty highways, you're never really alone. And that's exactly the problem. "22 years of driving freight across the country shows you things they don't cover in trucking school. I was 51 when this happened, driving refrigerated goods from Chicago to Pittsburgh in my old Kenworth that I'd bought used 5 years earlier. My wife Karen always worried about me driving alone at night, especially after our son moved out to college, leaving just the 2 of us and our German Shepherd, Duke, at home. I'd been making the same run twice a month for nearly 3 years, knew every rest stop, every way station, every damn pothole on that route. That particular morning in early May, I'd left the distribution center around 2 a.m., hoping to beat the morning rush through the city. The weather was perfect, clear skies with just enough moonlight to see the farmland stretching out on both sides of the interstate. Everything about that night felt routine, normal even, right up until I reached that overpass outside Fort Wayne. About an hour into Indiana, there's this old concrete overpass that crosses the highway, one of those ancient things from the 60s with rust stains running down the pillars like dried blood. No exit ramps, no connecting roads that I could see anymore, just this bridge sitting there in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by abandoned cornfields and the occasional collapsed barn. As I approached it doing about 65, my headlights caught something up on the bridge. A person just standing there at the railing, looking straight down at the traffic. Now I'd seen people on overpasses before, usually kids throwing rocks or idiots taking pictures, but this was different. This person wasn't moving at all, just standing perfectly still with their arms at their sides, wearing what looked like dark coveralls, or maybe a mechanic's jumpsuit. The way they tracked my cab as I passed underneath gave me this uncomfortable twist in my gut, like when you catch someone staring at you through a window. Their head turned slowly, following my movement with this unnatural precision that made every hair on my arm stand up. I'd already passed under the bridge when I heard it, this heavy thud that shook the whole trailer, like someone had dropped a sandbag from height. The impact was strong enough that I felt it through the driver's seat, that vibration traveling through the fifth wheel connection right into the cab. My first thought was maybe a chunk of concrete had fallen from the deteriorating overpass. Happens sometimes with these old bridges. But then came another sound, a scraping noise that started at the back of the trailer and moved forward, metal on metal, like someone dragging a crowbar across the roof. I checked my mirrors but couldn't see anything in the darkness behind me. The scraping continued for maybe 10 seconds, stopped, then started again, this time accompanied by what sounded like footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps walking along the top of my 53-foot trailer while I was doing 65 miles per hour down the interstate. My CB radio crackled to life, startling me bad enough that I jerked the wheel slightly. "Northbound Kenworth, you got company up top," came a voice. Probably another trucker heading south who'd seen something in his headlights as we passed. Before I could grab the mic to respond, the walking sounds stopped, replaced by a rhythmic banging near the front of the trailer, right behind my cab. 3 measured hits, pause, 3 more hits, like someone knocking to get my attention. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road while my mind raced through possibilities. Maybe some crazy person had actually jumped from that overpass, but surviving that fall onto a moving truck seemed impossible. The nearest rest area was 12 miles ahead according to the green highway sign that flashed past, and I made the decision right there to pull over as soon as possible, even though every instinct told me to keep driving, to not stop until I reached somewhere populated and well lit. Those 12 miles felt like 12 hours. The noises on the roof had stopped completely after the knocking, which somehow made everything worse. The silence meant I didn't know where this person was anymore, if they were still up there, waiting, or if they'd somehow gotten off. I kept checking my mirrors obsessively, looking for any movement, any shadow that didn't belong. Other vehicles passed me going faster, their headlights briefly illuminating my trailer, but nobody else called out on the CB. I thought about calling 911, but what would I say? Someone might be on my truck? By the time cops arrived, whoever it was would be long gone. The rest area finally appeared in my headlights, one of those big modern stops with multiple parking areas for trucks and cars, bright LED lights everywhere, and a welcome center that stayed open 24 hours. I pulled into the truck parking section, choosing a spot right under one of the brightest light poles, surrounded by other rigs with drivers probably sleeping in their cabs. Before getting out, I grabbed the tire iron I kept behind my seat and my heavy-duty flashlight, the kind that doubles as a club if needed. I sat there for a full minute, engine idling, just listening and watching. Nothing moved outside except the occasional flutter of trash in the wind. Finally, I opened my door and stepped down, keeping my back against the cab while I scanned the area. The parking lot was mostly quiet, just the hum of diesel engines and refrigeration units from other trucks. I walked around to the passenger side first, shining my light up at the trailer roof from different angles, looking for anyone who might still be hiding up there. Nothing. Then I noticed the ladder at the back of my trailer. The metal rungs were slightly bent, like someone heavy had climbed them recently. I always did my pre-trip inspections thoroughly, and those rungs had been perfectly straight when I'd left Chicago. My mouth went dry as I realized whoever had been on that overpass had definitely made it onto my truck. I climbed up those bent rungs carefully, my flashlight clenched between my teeth while I gripped the tire iron in one hand. When my head cleared the edge of the trailer roof, I swept the light across the surface. The entire top was covered in long, deep scratches in the aluminum, like claw marks but made with something metal. They formed a path from the back all the way to the front, exactly where I'd heard the footsteps. Near the front edge, right above where my cab would be, there were handprints in what looked like motor oil or grease, perfectly visible against the silver metal. But what really made my stomach turn were the dents, 5 or 6 deep impressions where someone had been striking the roof with something heavy. In the center of one dent, wedged into the damaged metal, was a railroad spike. Not hammered in, just pushed hard enough to stick there like a calling card. I pulled it free and noticed something wrapped around it, a piece of paper, grimy and torn, with an address written in pencil, a truck stop about 40 miles ahead on my route. The smart thing would have been to call the police right then, show them the damage, file a report. But part of me needed to know who this person was, what they wanted. I climbed back down and walked through the rest area, showing the paper to other drivers, asking if they'd heard about anything strange at that address. One older driver, a guy with a gray beard down to his chest, went pale when he saw it. He told me that truck stop had been closed for 2 years after a driver was killed there, beaten to death with a piece of rebar during a robbery. The killer was never caught, but truckers had been reporting weird encounters on this stretch of highway ever since. Someone jumping onto trucks from overpasses trying to get drivers to stop. The theory was the killer was still working the route, looking for victims, using the abandoned truck stop as some kind of base. The driver advised me to forget the address, report the incident, and take a different route next time. But he also said something that chilled me. Check your trailer doors. Sometimes they try to get inside while you're driving. I practically ran to the back of my trailer, flashlight bouncing wildly as I moved. The seal was broken. The numbered metal seal that the warehouse had put on in Chicago, the one I'd verified and logged in my paperwork, was cut clean through and hanging by a thread. My refrigerated load of medical supplies, worth about $200,000, was now compromised. But that wasn't what made me step back. The door handle had bloody fingerprints on it, fresh enough that they were still tacky to the touch. I yanked the door open, ready to swing the tire iron at anyone inside. The cold air rushed out, fog billowing into the night, and my flashlight beam cut through it to reveal the cargo. Shifted. Several pallets had been pushed aside, creating a narrow path to the back wall. On the floor, made from what looked like old moving blankets and a torn tarp, was a makeshift bed, empty food cans, water bottles, and worst of all, a bucket in the corner that had clearly been used as a toilet. Someone had been living in my trailer, possibly for hours, maybe since before I'd even left Chicago. Next to the makeshift bed was a backpack, military surplus style, covered in dirt, and what looked like dried blood. Against every instinct, I opened it. Inside were driver's licenses, at least a dozen of them, all from different states, all truck drivers based on the CDL markings. I recognized one face from a missing person poster I'd seen at a truck stop in Indiana 2 weeks ago. There were also car keys, wedding rings, watches, and wallets, trophies. At the bottom of the bag was a journal, pages filled with cramped handwriting describing trucks, routes, times, and driver descriptions. My truck number was there, my route, even details about my usual schedule. The last entry, dated that morning, simply read, 51, alone, predictable tonight. I heard gravel crunch behind me, footsteps approaching slowly, deliberately. When I spun around, a man stood about 10 feet away, thin but muscular, wearing those same dark coveralls I'd seen on the overpass. His face was gaunt, hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes that reflected my flashlight like an animal's. In his hand was a piece of rebar, rusty and bent, with something dark staining one end. We stood there for what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds, neither of us moving, both calculating. Then he smiled, showing teeth that were broken and gray, and took a step forward. That's when my 22 years of trucking experience kicked in. I didn't try to fight him with the tire iron. Instead, I reached up and yanked the strap release for the load lock bar above the door, a heavy aluminum pole that keeps cargo from shifting. It crashed down between us with a metallic clang that echoed through the parking lot. The noise and sudden movement made him step back just for a second, but that was all I needed. I slammed both trailer doors shut, trapping him inside, and immediately shoved the tire iron through the door handles, locking them from the outside. He hit the doors from inside, hard enough to bow them outward, screaming words I couldn't understand, just pure rage. I grabbed my phone and called 911, backing away from the trailer while keeping my flashlight trained on those buckling doors. Other truckers had heard the commotion and started coming over, surrounding the trailer, making sure he couldn't escape if he somehow broke through. The police arrived within 8 minutes, 4 patrol cars and a K-9 unit. They surrounded my trailer with weapons drawn while I explained everything, showed them the journal, the IDs, the evidence, When they finally opened those doors, he came out swinging that rebar. But the officers were ready. It took 3 of them to get him on the ground and cuffed. His name was Leonard Voss, wanted in 4 states for murder, robbery, and assault. He'd been living like this for 3 years, jumping from overpasses onto trucks, either robbing drivers at rest stops or living in their trailers until the perfect moment to strike. The police found the remains of 2 missing drivers at that abandoned truck stop address he'd written down, buried in shallow graves behind the building. I had to spend the rest of the night giving statements, watching them process my trailer as a crime scene. The company sent another driver to finish my route while I drove my empty cab home. I couldn't stop thinking about all those IDs in his bag, all those drivers who hadn't been as lucky. Karen made me take a month off after that, and when I went back to work, I switched to day runs only, local routes where I could be home every night. I still drive, but I never pass under an overpass without checking my mirrors, and I always double-check my trailer seals, even at stops I know are safe. That piece of rebar they took as evidence still shows up in my dreams sometimes, along with those hollow eyes reflecting my flashlight beam in the darkness. I remember pulling into that little rest area sometime after midnight, the kind of place you only notice when you're desperate for a break. The lot was nearly empty, just a handful of trucks scattered like sleeping animals, a row of flickering lights along the restroom building, and the hum of a soda machine echoing through the stillness. My eyelids felt heavy from the miles behind me, and I figured a few hours in the sleeper would keep me sharp for the next stretch. After parking, I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and stretched out, telling myself I'd be out cold in minutes. The silence there wasn't peaceful. It had a weight to it like the world had stopped moving. I could hear every creak of the truck settling, every faint rustle of wind sliding over the cab. I left my boots by the step, flashlight within reach, and let the quiet wrap around me. It didn't take long before I drifted into that hazy state between sleep and awareness, where your mind still picks up on sounds, even if you're not fully awake. That's when the first knock came. It was a sharp, solid bang against the driver's side door. The sound rattled straight through the cab, jolting me upright. I yanked the curtain aside, expecting to catch someone standing there, a cop, maybe another driver asking for help. But the space outside was empty. The pavement stretched out under the lamps. The other truck stood motionless, and no one was near enough to have made that sound. I sat frozen for a long minute, waiting for movement, but the lot stayed dead quiet. Just as I started convincing myself it could have been the metal cooling, another knock slammed against the opposite side of the cab. This time it was louder, more deliberate, like someone had walked around and chosen the other door just to mess with me. Then came footsteps, slow, steady crunches in the gravel, tracing a circle around the truck. I held my breath, straining to follow the sound as it moved from one corner to the next, as if someone was deliberately making sure I knew they were there. I slid into the driver's seat without even realizing it, my pulse hammering in my ears. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse, like whoever was out there was waiting for me to make the next move. I gripped the steering wheel, debating whether to hit the horn and wake the whole place up, or just sit perfectly still and pretend I wasn't inside. My mouth was dry, and every second that ticked by made me more certain someone was standing just out of sight, staring at the cab. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I twisted the key and the headlights blasted across the lot, bleaching everything in harsh white light. For a split second, the beams cut across the restroom building, the vending machines, and the handful of parked rigs. Nothing moved. Not a shadow. Not a person darting away. The lot was empty, eerily, impossibly empty, considering what I'd just heard circling me. But then my eyes dropped lower, and that's when I saw them. Boot prints pressed deep into the dirt right below my door. They weren't old or faded, not washed out by weather. They were fresh, edges crisp, the tread pattern sharp like they'd been stamped there seconds ago. The trail led straight up from the edge of the lot, stopped exactly at my step, and went nowhere else. No exit, no turn back, Nothing. Just an ending at the base of my truck. I sat there frozen in the glow of the lights, staring at those prints until my vision blurred. There was no way someone could have walked up, knocked, circled, and then vanished into thin air without me catching even a flicker of movement. Yet the evidence was staring me in the face. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that place. So I threw the truck in gear, not caring how little rest I'd had. The engine roared, and I pulled back onto the highway, leaving the rest area shrinking in my mirrors. The prints burned into my memory. The drive that followed was one of the longest of my life. Every shadow along the shoulder looked like it could peel away into a figure. Every overpass felt like a place someone might be waiting. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone trailing me on foot, which made no sense, but my nerves wouldn't let the thought go. By the time I reached the next truck stop with more lights and people around, my chest was tight from holding it all in. I parked under the brightest lamp I could find and stayed awake until dawn, too wired to close my eyes again. The strangest part is that when I finally stepped out in the morning, the side of my cab was spotless. No mud, no scuffs, no sign of anyone pressing against it. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. The prints lined up in the dirt, perfectly fresh, ending right at my door like whoever made them had climbed inside. Except I knew every lock was still engaged, and I'd been alone the whole time. I told a couple of drivers I trust about it later, and they just gave me that look like they weren't sure if I'd nodded off and dreamed the whole thing. But the detail that sticks with me, the tread pattern on those boots, I remember it clear as day. They weren't generic work boots like you'd expect out there. The soles had this deep zigzag design, almost like military issue, and the steps were evenly spaced, like someone walking with calm, steady purpose. That's not the kind of thing my brain would just invent in the middle of the night. To this day, I avoid smaller rest areas when I'm running late at night. I'll push myself to make it to a bigger stop, even if it means losing an hour of sleep. I never heard those knocks again, never saw more prints like that, but I can't unsee what I saw that night. If anyone asks why I hate sleeping in the dark, empty lots, that's the reason. Because once you've had something walk right up to your door in the dead of night, circle your truck and vanish without a trace, you don't ever really rest easy again. Most truckers have a handful of roads they never forget, and for me, Route 19 has always been one of them. It cuts through the mountains in a way that feels unnatural, like the asphalt was forced onto rock that didn't want to be touched. The nights are long out there, no radio signal, no glow of towns in the distance, just black ridges against a darker sky. On that particular run, I had the cab window cracked, letting in air that smelled like wet pine and cold stone. My headlights carved out a narrow tunnel ahead, the rest of the world swallowed by shadows. The curve had been on my mind even before I reached it. Everyone knew it was the kind of bend that demanded respect, the kind where you eased down whether you wanted to or not. I could feel the road sloping, my trailer tugging faintly behind me as the grade tilted. I tapped the brakes and watched the speedometer drop, telling myself I'd be through it in less than a minute. The engine's steady growl was the only company I had, and even that sounded muted, like the mountain itself was pressing down on me. That's when the flashing lights appeared, red, sharp, pulsing in the dark. A car sat crosswise in the middle of the lane, hazard lights flickering in a steady rhythm that looked almost too perfect. The body of the car looked crumpled, nose dipped low, and the windshield reflected the glare like shattered glass. My foot hit the brake harder than I meant to, the trailer pulling at an angle that made the steering wheel fight back. The whole rig lurched and groaned, tires screaming against the pavement, until I managed to stop just short of plowing into the wreck. I killed the hazards on my own truck and grabbed the door handle, adrenaline already buzzing through me. The air outside was colder than it had been minutes earlier, sharp in my throat as I jumped down from the cab. My boots hit the asphalt and I jogged toward the wreck, ready to yell out to anyone inside. But before I even got close enough to touch it, the sight made me skid to a halt. The road was empty. No car, no blinking hazards, not even debris. only the thick smell of rubber and the jagged streaks of skid marks trailing across the lane where I'd braked. I stood there breathing hard, my pulse loud in my ears, staring at empty pavement that seconds earlier had been blocked by a wreck. The skid marks were real. I could trace the black streaks with my eyes all the way back to my rig. But there was nothing else. No shards of glass, no twisted bumper, not even a faint glint of metal in the headlights. I muttered something to myself, more out of disbelief than fear, and walked a few paces up and down the lane just to prove I wasn't losing it. The mountains around me were silent in a way that didn't feel natural. Normally you'd hear at least a whisper of wind through the trees or the groan of a truck engine echoing from somewhere far off. But there was nothing. The only sound came from my own truck idling behind me, hazard lights blinking slow and steady like it was mocking what I'd just seen. My breath fogged in the air as I crouched down to touch the asphalt, feeling the rough grooves where rubber had burned into the road. That was the part that unsettled me most. Those marks weren't just mine. Another set ran at an angle across the curve, thinner, lighter, but fresh. I turned back toward the cab, half expecting to see headlights cresting the hill, or maybe even the wreck reappearing in the dark. My hands gripped the metal rail as I climbed back in, trying to decide if I should call highway patrol or just keep driving. A part of me worried someone might have run off the road down into the ravine, but when I aimed my flashlight over the edge, it only revealed endless rock and trees swallowing the beam whole. If there was a car down there, it was buried deeper than I could see. Sitting behind the wheel again, I couldn't shake the image of those blinking hazard lights. They'd seemed too bright, too even, almost like a signal meant to pull me in. The longer I thought about it, the more I wondered if I'd slammed on the brakes for something that was never really there. But the marks on the asphalt said otherwise, and that was enough to keep me gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual as I eased the truck back into gear and crept through the rest of the curve. The descent on the other side of the curve stretched out longer than I remembered, the road winding like a snake through the black hills. Every shadow in my mirrors looked alive, like something might be following me just out of sight. I kept the rig steady, hands clamped on the wheel, headlights catching nothing but endless pavement and guardrails. After a few miles, the tension began to wear me down, and I finally reached for the CB just to hear my own voice. The static that answered back was sharp, like a hiss in my ear, before fading into dead air again. I tried focusing on the rhythm of the drive, letting the hum of the engine take over, but the image of those hazard lights kept replaying. They hadn't blinked irregularly the way damaged cars usually do. Those flashes were too exact, like a metronome ticking in the dark. I couldn't stop wondering if someone else had seen the same thing, maybe even slammed on their brakes like me, leaving their own marks behind. The thought made the road feel heavier, as if every mile carried stories I'd never want to know. When I finally pulled into a small gas stop hours later, I asked another driver if he'd ever noticed anything strange near that curve. The guy, an older hauler with deep lines on his face, didn't hesitate. He told me plenty of people had reported accidents there, but by the time help arrived, there was never a car to be found, just skid marks. He said it plain, without theatrics, like he'd heard it a dozen times before. Then he shook his head, told me to take it slow through there from now on, and went back to sipping his coffee. I've driven that stretch of Route 19 more times since, and I still slow down every single time I approach the bend. The skid marks fade and new ones appear, always crisscrossing the asphalt like reminders left behind. I never saw those hazard lights again, but I don't think I need to. Once was enough. Whatever I encountered that night, it left me with one truth I can't shake. Sometimes the most dangerous thing on the road isn't what's really there, it's what you think you see.